Hi, my name is Ankur Banerjee. I'm the CTO and co-founder at cheqd Network, which is a Cosmos chain that's been working on digital identity, decentralized identity for a while. We've been working on a project on making this a lot more accessible for the Web3 use case and for Cosmos projects. So I just wanted to talk people through that and also give a bit more technical detail on how we use a blend of on-chain and off-chain cryptography for tackling things like digital identity and reputation. But maybe just as a show of hands, how many of you here are developers or technical? Okay, helps me gauge the level of the talk. And how many of you have worked with any kind of decentralized identifiers? I think Kiln I've heard of, yeah, tiny bit. Any other hands? It's also another one there. Well, you, of course. So I'll try and give a bit of, ask me to slow down at any point or ask any questions. But to get started, let's maybe take a look at how are on-chain identifiers used for reputation at the moment. And the typical example that you think of or hear or look at are very common ones are ETH handles or ICNS handles, Interchain name system handles. And so what's quite interesting is that people get known in terms of their reputation by what their on-chain handles are. So you see a couple of examples of this, like Vitalik.eth. Sunny has an ICNS handle on his profile. And that's quite often how you recognize what the high reputation users are within an ecosystem. And this is fairly large. There's about 2.76 million ENS name systems, quite a few of them rising within the Cosmos community as well. And typically what you find is people will put on some kind of PFP or proof of actual person type NFT on their profile, and that's how they tend to get known. If that particular wallet holds that NFT, then you know it belongs to that specific person. But it does sort of create the issue when you try and identify someone just by their handle. That's not necessarily their real and legal identity, and a lot of the Web3 space doesn't work like that. But it does create a challenge about how do you know that that specific handle is the real handle that belongs to that person. And we've seen a bit of this happen as people have tried to move from Twitter to Threads or Twitter to Mastodon. How do you know that the new account or the profile that's been created on Mastodon is indeed belonging to the same person that it used to before, that you've encountered on a different sort of forum or different sort of social media network? Because just having the same handle doesn't necessarily correlate strongly to that. It could, I don't have the same handle on Threads and Instagram because I never had the same handle available. And so this sort of goes back to a very popular saying from the early, I think, 90s, when the New Yorker did a cartoon that on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. I think that kind of pseudonymity is quite nice and is one of the reasons why the Web3 community thrives. A lot of people can actually go build a reputation around themselves without necessarily revealing their legal identity, but it also does create problems. And so the question then comes up, and a lot of developers try to solve this by saying, let's give people NFTs or soul-bound tokens to prove their identity. Why is that not an easy way to do it? And the answer to that particular question, as I describe it, is NFTs are great for a lot of things. I'll come to that in a second. But a lot of NFTs can be something, what I describe as identity herpes, in the sense that anybody can give you an NFT at any point in time. They can give you, in fact, 5,000 NFTs airdrop to your wallet that say your DeFi credit score is shit. Or they can send you an equal amount saying you're not a great developer. They could try elements like you need to pay me $10,000 right now, or I will send those NFTs. And the other sort of aspect of that is you can't just go delete them. You need to go spend your own money to send it to a burn contract. So there are challenges that crop up when you focus or go towards NFTs as a mechanism of it. I think it is useful for some particular stuff. But the other part is It is also quite self-doxing. You might only want to reveal that you have a Bored Ape Yacht Club, for example, but the handles, the wallets that that particular wallet that holds the Bored Ape Yacht Club interacts with also reveals everything else that you have. So it's not necessarily, you can't selectively choose to say, on this particular occasion, I just want people to know that I have a Bored Ape Yacht Club and nothing else. Even if you transfer it across to a different wallet, you'd still be able to just trace what these wallets have interacted with. I have one question for the audience. How many of you have heard of soulbound tokens? Yep. Do you think soulbound tokens are transferable? Yes or no? The answer is yes. You just give somebody else your mnemonic. So they're not very soulbound. It's soulbound in the sense that it is tied to a particular wallet, but it does not fundamentally mean they're linked to a specific person. It just means it can't be transferred out of that wallet. And so what they're great for is, I think the last point, honestly, it matters a lot. They have name recognition and adoption. They are on-chain, so it doesn't necessarily rely on going and fetching it from somewhere else. But they're also fantastic for showing off as a status object. It's, if you have a Lambo parked outside of your house, you can make your neighbors feel jealous. Or if you get very exclusive sneakers, then you can show that particular thing off. But what we've sort of tried to say is that there's a bit of a balance. If you want to prove that you have a DeFi credit score, or you own more than 10 million tokens in a particular project, and you want to confirm that fact without actually doxing what your wallet is, or what the exact balance down to the 6th decimal is, an NFT is perhaps not the best way of doing it. So what is it that we sort of recommend instead? And we tried to build this out. It's an open source project called cheqd. We launched as a Cosmos chain about 2.5 years ago. But more recently, we also introduced something called creds.xyz as a social reputation thing that takes all of that open source stuff and puts it into something for a social reputation system. And I'll try and use that to demonstrate how all of this works. Whom did we design it for? We designed it for community admins and moderators of Web3 projects, especially other Cosmos networks. And what does it allow you to do? It allows members of that community to collect digital reputation credentials from their favorite projects. So these can be things like being able to say, I am an official moderator for the project. I'm an official team member for the project. Or I was within the first 500 people to join the Discord channel for this particular project, which in turn could then be used to unlock airdrops or special access or early access to features. You can have things for maybe they've been a technical contributor to the project and they've contributed to that software. All of this is a blend of on-chain and off-chain cryptography. But the way we describe it is that you can build your reputation and you can take it anywhere. It makes it portable. So the key aspect of that we're trying to handle is you should have these in a private zero-knowledge wallet that we've built. So when these reputation credentials get issued to you by a project, they only are stored with you, a bit like a password manager like Bitwarden or 1Password if you've used it in the past. But the cryptographic proof to make sure that these have not been tampered with, they do live on-chain. And so how that sort of works, and you can claim this yourself at the end, is we created one for a lot of the workshops. This is what a digital credential looks like. Obviously, this is not the machine view. This is sort of a nicely formatted view. But at the end, and you'd be able to get a credential for this talk as well, that just says, I physically attended Nebular. I had access to this code. I scanned it, and it says I was a Nebular attendee. And that gets stored within the creds.xyz zero-knowledge wallet that we created. So how does that work? So when we issued these credentials, we created a on-chain decentralized identifier. People, you might have heard of the term DIDs. How many, maybe as a show of hands, DIDs? No? Okay. So DIDs stand for decentralized identifiers. They look a bit like this. So it says did : cheqd : mainnet, and then it has a unique identifier. And that typically stores the public keys or the signatures of people who have issued this credential. In this particular case, that is the did for Nebular Summit's organizers. Who can be an issuer? Anyone. Anybody can go and set and publish one of these on our chain. But obviously, the ones with a higher reputation are more trusted. What I mean by that is, I can say my name is Ankur Banerjee, and I live at a particular address, but it's obviously a lot more reputable if that comes from my local council that says I live at that particular address. So the way I describe it is anybody can go and create a did and issue a digital credential off the back of it, but if they're not high reputation, it's the equivalent of taking a sheet of paper and writing it in crayon and saying, yes, I do have $10 million in my bank account. And the last part is it's not just the public signatures. You can also have a lot of other things that help with processing or displaying the credential. And it looks a bit like this. This is a result that has come back from our chain. This is a bit of an international standard. There's quite a few companies that work on it, about 150 different companies, including some large ones like Microsoft and Apple and Mozilla and so on. But you don't need to focus on the whole thing, but the main part is this is the same identifier that you saw before. This is a result that has been fetched from our ledger. This is going to be the key part. This is a public key that says, if things are signed with this public key, then you know it came from me. If you're working on Cosmos, how many of you have heard of something called keybase.io if you set up a Cosmos validator? Okay, so keybase.io is a centralized example of that. It's a service that is owned and run by Zoom. What you do when you want to display your picture and details of your validator, like the logo of your validator and the details is, you go on this website called keybase.io, you do something similar like publishing a public key and then attaching it to your Cosmos node. And that proves that that person who has that profile controls that particular Cosmos validator. So people can't impersonate you by just uploading a copy of your official logo and trying to pass themselves off as you. Where does the off-chain part come in? So the off-chain part is called verifiable credentials. I think verifiable is a bad term because a lot of people often change it to verified credentials. They use it in the human sense of this, the information inside this is trustworthy. That's not what they mean. Verifiable just means they're cryptographically verifiable. From the first point they were issued, they could still have garbage inside it. It's a bit like an off-ledger NFT. If you think of an NFT, it's just some information that contains like the characteristics of the NFT and then has a link to an image stored somewhere on IPFS. So it's very much like that, but having it off-ledger. It's signed with the on-chain did that you showed before. I'll show you an example of this. And there are three sort of large formats. If you're a developer, you might be very familiar with something called JSON Web Tokens, which is a form of digitally signing information. But for the attendee credential that I showed to you before, this is somewhat what it looks like. When you go claim it, you'll actually be able to see a button that says JSON, and you'll be able to toggle it on to see what's behind it. But to call out like some examples, this did that you see is the same one that you saw before. And so what this is saying is that the issuer of this digital credential that says you were an attendee of Nebula was created by Nebular Summit because they are the organizers. And within the credential, then you have the details that you saw earlier on the page. Now, this personally belongs to you. This particular did, this is not on-chain. This is just a public key that is stored in your zero-knowledge wallet that we've designed. That's a one-to-one link that you've established with Nebula. So a bit like an attendee ID, but designed for machines to read. What it also proves is that if you had to then go and prove to someone that you attended Nebular, you would share this whole file, so to speak, but you would sign it with this key on top of the additional thing that Nebular had already done, and that proves that it was in possession of the wallet that it was issued to. And so the outcome of this is you can have some cryptographic proof on Ledger, but I didn't actually have to go and write down, this was my name, this was my attendee ID, this is the event that I attended, and publish that on chain. Because if you did, then that's readable by everyone, even if it's currently not accessed. Even if they don't know what your particular wallet address is, at some point, if it gets found out or doxed, then they have access to everything. There are some other interesting approaches, like VectorSTAO, whom we work with, are also looking at doing an aspect of this where you can store them on chain, and then maybe do forms of selective disclosure. So selective disclosure means, for example, if you want to prove the dates that you attended an event, or that you attended an event in Paris without actually revealing the address that was in there, like Albert School at 18 Rue des Paradis, you can essentially just blank that out without tampering the entire credential. It can be quite useful. For example, if you had a project issue a credential that says they know exactly how much you have, let's say you're an investor in the project, they know you own exactly 10,200,000, 37,568, but they give you a credential that proves it. You can then, if somebody asks you, prove to me that you own more than 5 million tokens, you can generate cryptographic proof that says, from that credential that had the exact amount, I've now generated proof that says I have more than 5 million. You can do things like that. And so what it becomes quite powerful for is you can obviously, if you choose to, make them public and publish them publicly, like you can do on the creds.xyz website, or publish them on chain. But if you don't want to, you can keep them in a wallet that you control and only selectively send them across to people that you want to show it to. And so how can you trust them? The proofs are stored on our network. The tamper-proofness is proven and tested technology. Things like digital signatures and JSON Web Tokens, they've been used for like 25 years. It's very commonly used to sign into any Web 2.0 application that you can think about. And it's built on international standards. So it's built by a group called the World Wide Web Consortium. They define a lot of the standards for how most of the modern web works, and also something called Decentralized Identity Foundation that has about 150 members. I don't know how many, did people see the story that LinkedIn has started doing badges that prove that you worked at a place? How many people have seen that? No? Okay, so LinkedIn now gives you a blue tick badge that is issued by an employer if you work there, and that's supposed to denote that you were an official employee. That is given as a verifiable credential as well. So it's completely in your control. You can take it outside of LinkedIn and prove to someone, and they could do it because Microsoft runs most of the email systems in most companies. So they have a pretty good idea that if you had an account at this particular company during those dates, you were likely an official employee. So it's pretty smart. But what it allows you to prove is, we had somebody on LinkedIn who pretended that they used to work at cheqd, and they said they joined in May 2020, which would have made them employee number 3, but they had never worked there. So for scenarios like that, if even if the company goes bust, that's still in your control. No, you don't need to go back to a physical person for a reference and say, did this person actually work there or not at that particular time? It is a digital file that you have in your control. It's in your wallet, and even 20 years down the line, you can go and prove that. So it can be quite powerful. A lot of these people, in fact, partner with cheqd because I mentioned there are 3 large credential formats. Most companies can only handle 1 or 2 of them. We do all 3. We had a very agnostic or platform agnostic view around this. And so what else can you store on chain? You can describe things like trusted issuer lists. So you could have a list of what are the DIDs for all of the Cosmos projects. So if you were presented a digital credential that said this is from a Cosmos project, even without knowing that beforehand, because new Cosmos projects come up every day, you could find that sort of like value on chain. You can have branding assets like fonts and logos. Just to give a quick example, you see that image that we generated over there. Our builder tool allows you to do this using Midjourney. Is what we're looking at. That's not fully launched yet. But it's a bit like an NFT in the sense that within the credential, you'll find this link at the bottom that's in fact published on our ledger. And that is the image file that was displayed on that particular credential. So if you want to, not just for machines, but if you want to make it easy for users to understand within a particular web wallet or web display, when I have my Apple Wallet, for example, if I have 20 different passes, the distinction in the visual design helps me pick out, okay, that's my boarding pass, that's my hotel reservation, that's my supermarket grocery card. So you can store things like that as well. And so the value of it is it helps for people it makes it really portable. You don't have to view these credentials within this app called creds.xyz that we built. You can take it to any compatible app that can understand that file, and they'll be able to visually show you what the digital credential looks like with all of the branding assets. They can also see, for example, if they didn't know beforehand what the list of Cosmos projects was, they can discover that from all of the annotations that are there in the file. And so what's quite interesting is, for most of us in crypto, I'm guessing this is a Cosmos conference, so you have Cosmos accounts and invest or have tokens in Cosmos. But how many of you also have something on Ethereum, Solana, Polkadot, right? So what's interesting is you have some reputation there. You either are staking or either through engagement in those projects or engagement in governance. And so the challenge is, if you were just focusing on on-chain NFTs, that becomes hard to do as a global view. Like, how much am I staking across Solana, Polkadot, Ethereum, and Cosmos projects? So it also gives sort of the benefit that because these are designed to be partially off-chain credentials, you can go and have a wallet that collects across your reputation across all of those things together. And finally, we put in a lot of work into how to make these privacy preserving. So when you want to share with someone, we've built Discord and Telegram bots. So you message a bot and you say, this handle got in touch with me, they're telling me they're Vitalik. Ask them to provide 20 credentials or digital credentials that prove their reputation from various different sources that say they're Vitalik. And we also back it up to decentralized storage with end-to-end encryption, a bit like how WhatsApp or 1Password works. And lastly, we also does not require an app or an extension. It works entirely within the browser. That was quite important for us because once you make it work within a browser, you can always then go put it in a mobile application. So that's it from my side. We call this sort of concept not your keys, not your identity, a bit like not your keys, not your crypto. If it's not actually portable and you can't leave the ecosystem and take it along, then there's not a lot of value to it. And if you scan this QR code at the end, that should allow you to claim a digital credential that says you attended this talk. Thank you. I think I might be out of time, but until I get kicked out, any questions?
Maybe a very quick one. What is the difference between what you implemented and what is standardized? So I mean, like, is the zero knowledge proof standardized?
Yes.
Or what is the
the zero-knowledge proof is standardized. So they have been official standards for about 5 to 6 years. Some of these, like selective disclosure JOTs, as they're called, or JSON Web Tokens, they have been around for a while. And OnCreds has been used by a lot of different governments as well. The bit that is not very standardized is this part. So being able to annotate a digital credential and say, this is the image for it, this is the issuer list for it, we're working with W3C to go standardize that and make it into a specification. But we felt this was sorely lacking. A lot of projects do a digital credential, but they only design it to be read by machines. So that's the only part that's non-standardized. Any other questions? Did that answer?
Yeah. So if there are no questions, maybe I have another quick one.
Yeah.
You're probably familiar with Sysmo. How would you say that this relates to Sysmo in one way or another? To me, this seems more standardized, but in the same space.
Yeah. I think the benefit of this one is the number of large organizations behind it, and also specifically that there's a lot of Web 2 companies working on it, because even Web 2 companies have challenges around data portability and identity, like LinkedIn, for example, not a Web 3 Cosmos project, but they had a problem of making that employment history portable. So I think that's where some of the benefit comes in, that a lot of the software and the tooling that is being built around it is not just purely Web 3 focused.
I think as well on Sysmo, like, from what I understand, they're almost like an aggregator of your on-chain identity. So whereas this is almost entirely off-chain, which means that like I could probably explain like one step out, like you could hide stuff, share different things to different people, and they wouldn't know it's you. So if you share different credentials and there's no linkage, then actually you can present yourself in a completely different way to two people or organizations, and they've got no linkage. Whereas, like, I guess with something like Sysmo, as soon as that's aggregated and someone kind of identifies you because it's on chain, you're stuck. Like, they could go, okay, well, there's Evan from Disco gave a really good example, which is, let's say you issue an NFT which is related to a university degree that's from a specific college in the US that has certain, like, is maybe a predominantly like African American and female. You can pretty because it's on Ledger, you can basically profile that account now because you know something that gives you hints. Whereas with something like this, like, you don't need to share that to anyone if you don't want to, and therefore the linkage is lower. So like you can't suddenly profile an account or an address because you're sharing different stuff. So I think Sysmo's very like on-chain aggregation of that. This is like off-chain, everything's hidden, like unless you start exposing it.
The other question people often ask is, let's say you had a bad credit score, you might not want to share it, right? So, and they say, therefore, we should go and store it on chain. My sort of like suggestion on that is you can also prove that using a negative. You can ask someone, prove to me from 200 different sources that you have good creditworthiness. So instead of having a single score, which is what the traditional Experians and Equifaxes of the world did because they centralized all of that information around themselves, if you had 200, let's say, or 100 recent credentials that said, yep, like they've been paying on their loans on time or on this particular DeFi loan, that could also be used to prove that you have a good track record of paying it. So there's ways to go prove it using, and especially to a computer, it doesn't matter. You could have 200 of these within a wallet, right? So you're not individually going and selecting that. Yeah.
I had a question regarding the disclosure of specific bits of information. So the way it's done, there's a signature for every part of the information, and then you
Correct.
disclose that part in particular.
Yeah.
So you cannot do proofs okay, is my data bigger than this number, for instance? It's not the kind of proof you can provide. And so is there any way, what you were talking about of ways to go around that, but do you know if there is any other way to be more go further with the proofs?
So there are some cryptographic techniques that allow you to do arbitrary things as a tear-off. You can do things like, does my name have the letter N in it? And they'll go that far. But and a lot of the focus, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, was to allow arbitrary proofs. What people realized is, in practice, most of them just try and do some very specific use cases, like just reveal your last name, or reveal your address in a range, or reveal your age range rather than your specific age. Prove that you live in London without giving your address. So what people discovered is, although cryptographically there's some fantastically complex and very smart cryptography that allows you to do arbitrary, like, zero knowledge, in practice, that kind of complexity hinders adoption because not a lot of developers understand that extremely complex cryptography. And so the trend has been, and maybe perhaps you don't need that full level of zero knowledge disclosure for every kind of data. Like if it's an attendee at Nebular, that's pretty standard. Like it's not something you'd want to do a lot of zero knowledge on. So the mix that we say is, if for 90% of the use cases, you can probably do something like selective disclosure JOTs, where there's an individual signature for parts of data that you can tear out. If you need a bit more than that, then there are 2 standards that allow you to do it. But obviously it has its complexities because the cryptography is a lot more complex.
I think like saying that, like to Ankur's point, like the spec for AnonCred, which allows that kind of thing, has been around for like 5 or 6 years. Selective disclosure is probably inside the last year, and it's almost as a direct reaction to what Ankur was saying, which is like not a lot of people were using the zero knowledge proof side of AnonCreds. They were just using selective disclosure. So basically, the community was like, well, could we just do this without all of the like heavy fancy cryptography, make it way simpler, and that's where SD JOTs came from. So it's almost been like a reaction to the way people were using stuff. Was like, we don't like, unless it's a specific use case, we just don't need the AnonCred side of things. Like for a lot of stuff, SD JOTs are like way more efficient, like, and actually solve most of the use cases.
You don't need like a prover or a verifier, all the constraints around.
I guess you still have a verifier, but it's more like you're not having to generate quite a heavy proof.
Yeah.
Like this is, I can say, way more than mine. It's just, my comment was more like the specs have almost reacted to the market reality of how people were using this stuff and going like, we don't all need to be doing these really heavy proofs. We're probably better off just doing like selective disclosure JOTs.
The verifier is just a verification that the signature is valid.
Correct, yeah. So the verifier means the person that you share it to, because they're the ones that's checking the signature. I don't know how many people have heard of Web 5 as a term. I'm sure most of you have. That's the branding that Square and Block went with. But this kind of stuff is not just for an attendee credential. They've been doing things like maybe you want to have instead of Spotify, you want to have your own music storage in the cloud along with all of your preferences. I think my listening habits and history, if I actually had that portable from Spotify, I could switch. But I can't. Like it's all locked in on Spotify. If I wanted to move from Twitter to Mastodon, they will give me like an Excel spreadsheet with all of my tweets for the past 10 years. How useful is that? So I think it's a broader idea that you could use these kinds of digital credentials, not just for saying I attended Nebular, but even to say, here's cryptographically tamper-proof proof that I have shifted my tweets from the past 10 years from Twitter to this new service called Mastodon while changing my handle. So they describe this as Web 5. They're also one of the big people on it. They have this website called Are We Web 5 Yet? Where you can go check out some of the more interesting projects that they've been doing as well. And yeah, thank you.